Hello, Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. Welcome. I'm Martin Williams from Creative North, and you were going to speak at the Creative North conference in June.
Oh, thank you, Martin. I'm glad to be here. Sorry to miss the conference in June, but you know, this is the way the world goes. So thanks for having me on Creative North.
Great. Okay. So first things first, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself and tell us who you are? And,
Okay. My name is Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, and I am a Ugandan author, but I live in Manchester at the moment. I have written 3 books so far. One is called Kintu, a historical novel, which came out in Britain in 2017. And the second book was a collection of short story called Manchester Happened, came out in 2019. And this year, my third book, a novel, is supposed to come out in August, COVID willing. And that's a little bit of a historical novel as well.
okay, that's great. Thanks for that introduction. The theme of Creative North this year is collaboration.
Yes.
What does collaboration mean to you? What sort of headline? How would you define collaboration as a headline?
Well, the obvious thing that comes to mind is, you know, the collaboration between 2 artists, you know, maybe a storyteller and a graphic illustrator, you know. But of course, within literature is the idea of collaboration between ideas, you know. So the collaboration between, let's say, fiction and myth, which is, to me, a fantastic collaboration. You know, where I look at how myth making and fiction work beautifully together, because, you know, myth and fiction are almost related, or the collaboration between history and fiction and how those 2 again work together. So yeah, it means quite a lot.
Okay, so we're not talking about a practical collaboration between publisher and author. In that sense, we're talking about a sort of philosophical idea of collaboration of truth and fiction. I mean, Seth Godin,
Yeah.
it's a marketing conference largely. And the reason that we invited you was because you're not a marketer, you are a storyteller. And storytelling is, everyone's talking about, I'm a storyteller, I'm a story. It's such a buzzword. It's such a popular way that people present themselves. I thought it would be great to have a genuine storyteller. And it's really interesting what you're talking about there, as in this collaboration between myth and truth, or truth and fiction in what you do as a storyteller. And Seth Godin talks about a story doesn't have to be true as long as it's useful. What is that kind of what you're saying?
First of all, it's interesting that people now are calling themselves storytellers, because there was a time when being called a storyteller was embarrassing to a lot of I think mainly authors who thought that they were much more than storytellers. I'm glad to hear it's now made a comeback.
You can't get away from it. Everyone calls themselves a storyteller. These LinkedIn's copywriters,
Yes, I am a storyteller, and the reason is because I started out as a child with both reading books, but also with storytelling. So for me, fiction just first came to me as in a form of folk tales. So with my grandparents, with other young people, when we in the evening before we went to bed, we went to sleep, lying in bed, we would tell stories. But also my grandfather was fond of telling my stories, and I quickly learned how to tell stories that were mostly folk tales. That's what we call them in Uganda. And they were mainly about the small, tiny animals which had to survive by their wits in the jungle. So you had the hare outwitting the leopard or the lion or the elephant. But also we had all these stories about girls who were not so good girls, which were moral tales, you know. They were rarely about boys. So by the time I started to read, I had learned to tell stories. And actually, my father quickly put me on Ladybird books. I don't know whether you read them as a young person, but again, I would read, for example, about Cinderella. But whenever I would go to the village, I would tell that story, you know, orally. So in that sense, I started out as a storyteller. And in my novels, I know there are all sorts of novels that you will find novels that are specifically concerned with the landscape. And so the story is not an issue. Or novels that are about idea, and so they are plotless. But and I think because of that childhood and that first introduction to storytelling, I do work at the story. So if you pick up my book, there will be a story. It will follow the experiences of a person and what he goes through or she goes through and what happens to him in the end. So yes, I am a storyteller in that sense.
Okay, so you're taking truths of your life and observations, truths of you as you perceive them, and using that sort of storytelling background to lay them out as stories. That collaboration between the structure and the way a story's told, and the myth that you can, you know, that is an essential part of storytelling, and the experience of your life.
Yes, I can help that because I deal mainly with realism, sometimes spiritual realism. But yes, I do use truth, my life experiences, or stories that I've heard about real people, or things that I've seen happening to other people. You know, real life experiences. I take those and I merge them with my imagination.
Yep.
Okay. I guess in my imagination would then be fiction. Okay. There's always that. And even when aspects, a character is totally imagined, I must inhabit that character for them to become real on the page. There must be that. My experiences and what I've imagined or what I've made up for it to come live on the page. So even when I am telling a story that comes from the 1700s, you know, that is so far from now. There will be elements of truth, of things that I've seen, of things that I've heard.
Yeah.
So
taking that into account, Jennifer, I mean, what would, if you were stood in front of the Royal Exchange Theatre, the audience there, what would be your takeaway? What would be your advice to people who wanted to be better storytellers, as everyone is trying to be? What does your experience as a
because I can only tell you my experiences of as a storyteller. I tend to resist telling people that this is what makes you a good storyteller, because I suspect that there are ways out there, a lot of ways out there that can make you a good storyteller. But for me, as a good storyteller, you must you must see that world you're talking about. It must be real for you.
Commit to the...
The characters must be real to you. So I tend to, when I set a world, I tend to see it, and I tend to impose on a world that is familiar to me. Okay, it could be fictitious, but I impose it on this fiction on a place that I've been, so that I know where I'm standing every time I talk about that place.
Okay.
Okay, that's the collaboration between truth and fiction. It's the same with characters. I will create a character, but often they tend to turn out looking like someone I know.
Okay.
That way I am able to pick up on gestures, on mannerism, on the way they talk. For me, getting fiction out of my mind and imposing it on something tangible, someone I know, makes the story come alive.
Okay, I like that. I get that completely. Commit to the character based on a real character, so you can fill in detail with your imagination, I guess. Is that what you're saying? Have I summed it up well?
Absolutely. As long as the character is alive. So another thing I tend to say is listen to people. For example, when you're in public, we listen to how people talk and how we interrupt each other and how we speak with silence, how we use non-syllabic sounds to communicate. It all makes your story real. But you don't make that up. You have to observe.
No, that's good. That's great advice. Okay, Jennifer. Yeah, we're just having these short Creative North sessions here. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your input. It's a shame we couldn't have seen you in June, the Royal Exchange, but circumstances conspired against us. And yeah, all the best with your book release. I hope, despite what's going on, I hope it's an enormous success. I've been reading some of your previous stuff. It's just beautiful. So
thank you for having me. At least now I feel like I've attended the the festival.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
One day we will, definitely.